Welcome to HOA Story Speaker, your daily destination for powerful, shocking, and real-life inspired HOA stories.
Sir, step away from that tractor right now or you're under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a court-ordered seizure. I had just driven 9 miserable hours through a Christmas Eve blizzard to bury my grandfather and settle his bankrupt farm estate, only to arrive and find 3 HOA rental cops chaining his old John Deere to a repo truck. Court-ordered, one of them barked. I ripped the papers from his hand. This wasn't a court order at all, just an HOA violation notice with no judge's signature anywhere. The lead guard smirked and said farms get condemned for unpaid fines, and everything was being hauled off today. Grandpa had only been gone 3 months. No notices, no warnings, no talk of fines or seizures. These vultures waited until Christmas Eve to strip a dead man's legacy bare. The freezing wind, the diesel fumes, and their smug power trip made my blood boil. I locked eyes with him and said calmly, "You picked the wrong day and the wrong family." What they didn't know about my real job was about to blow their whole scam apart. What would you do if HOA goons tried stealing your family farm on Christmas Eve? My name is Owen Fletcher, and for 15 years I've hunted financial criminals for the FBI. But standing in my grandfather's driveway that night, watching rent-a-cop steal his John Deere, I felt like a rookie getting pushed around by mall security. Harold Fletcher's Christmas tree farm had fueled holiday dreams since 1962. Every December, the scent of fresh pine mixed with hot chocolate steam as families wandered his 40 acres hunting for the perfect tree. Kids rode on his shoulders, parents argued about height, and Grandpa just smiled and tied trees to car roofs with rope that smelled like hay and diesel. Then cancer hit like a runaway freight train. Medical bills swallowed everything. Experimental treatments, 3 surgeries, specialists charging more per hour than most people earned in a month. The farm went bankrupt 18 months ago, but Harold kept fighting until his heart finally gave out in September. I'd been managing the estate remotely from an undercover assignment in Seattle. The lawyers said it was straightforward. Sell equipment, pay debts, keep the land. Nobody mentioned predators circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That's when she showed up. Victoria Ashworth stepped out of a white Escalade like she was surveying conquered ground. A designer handbag worth more than my grandfather's monthly Social Security check. A clipboard clutched like a weapon. Dead shark eyes that screamed HOA president with a god complex. Her vanity plate read community standards, because subtlety was apparently buried alongside common decency. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, her voice dripping fake concern like syrup from a cracked bottle. "Victoria Ashworth, Pine Ridge Estates Development Authority. We have an urgent situation." She shoved a folder thick enough to choke a horse into my hands. The pages rustled as I flipped through surveillance photos, violation notices, and bills that made my federal paycheck look like lunch money. $47,000 in accumulated violations. Overgrown landscaping. Unpermitted structures. Unauthorized commercial activity. Failure to maintain community aesthetics. Commercial activity. This had been a Christmas tree farm since Eisenhower was president. Was a Christmas tree farm. Her heels clicked on frozen dirt like a countdown to execution. Community standards evolve, Mr. Fletcher. Your grandfather's rustic methods no longer align with property values or neighborhood expectations. The folder held photos of my land taken from every angle, time-stamped and measured like evidence in a federal RICO case. Someone had been stalking this place for months, logging every tall blade of grass and every weathered board. "You have 48 hours to pay in full," she continued, glancing at her gold watch like time itself was charging interest. "After that, seizure proceedings begin. 47 grand for letting grass grow while my grandfather fought for his life." I told her to show me the legal authority. She smiled like a crocodile sizing up injured prey. Emergency community protection powers. When investments are threatened by neglect, we act. Her vanilla perfume mixed with entitlement and diesel fumes from the repo truck. "We're not villains," she said. "We're protecting hard-working families." I looked past her at her version of community. Cookie-cutter McMansions squatting on former ranch land like suburban tumors. Lawns trimmed to golf course perfection. Identical driveways. Every house screaming imported expectations. But beyond them, the real Pine Ridge still existed. Hank's auto shop with Christmas lights strung across the bays. Margaret's little house where she taught 3rd grade for 40 years, porch lights still glowing. Places where community meant helping neighbors, not exploiting them. "Of course," Victoria purred. "If payment is difficult, we have investors willing to purchase at fair market value. 20 cents on the dollar should be generous for distressed assets." 20 cents. 460 years of Christmas memories and 3 generations of sweat. That's when it clicked like a gun cocking. This wasn't overzealous enforcement. This was a coordinated heist, organized, calculated, probably illegal, and exactly the kind of financial crime I'd dismantled my entire career. The only question was how deep it went, and who else was already buried in it. The next morning, Christmas Day, because even Jesus apparently gets no respect from these people, I was choking down coffee that tasted like motor oil when a convoy rolled into the driveway. County Environmental Inspector Bradley Kowalski stepped out of an official truck, followed by 3 men in hazmat suits and a news crew that just happened to be nearby. Environmental emergency assessment, Kowalski announced, waving paperwork like a warrant. An anonymous tip claimed soil contamination from illegal agricultural chemicals. Illegal chemicals. Grandpa used less chemistry than a kindergarten art class. I asked for credentials and snapped photos of his badge. The name tugged at my memory. Kowalski pointed at the old fertilizer shed like it was Chernobyl. Immediate hazmat cleanup. $85,000 due in 72 hours or the property would be condemned. 85 on top of Victoria's 47, over Christmas weekend with every court closed. Then the news crew pounced. Channel 7 News. Sir, how do you respond to claims your family farm poisoned the local water supply? The same well that tested clean for 60 straight years. As the reporter shoved a mic in my face, I stared at Kowalski's signature. Then it slammed into me. Oregon, 2022. Developer kickback scandal. This man had falsified contamination reports to help developers steal land. I'd spent 6 months building that case. He was supposed to be in federal prison. Mr. Kowalski, I said loudly for the cameras, interesting career move. Last I heard, you were serving federal time for falsifying environmental reports. His face went white as the hazmat suits around him. As he scrambled to explain himself to the suddenly alert news crew, I went inside and opened my laptop. Federal databases don't take holidays, and 15 years of muscle memory kicked in instantly. I had learned years earlier that legitimate environmental inspectors must be licensed by the state, something you can confirm online in about 5 minutes if you know where to search. Real inspectors carry liability insurance, explain their testing methodology in detail, and strictly follow chain of custody rules for every sample. Fake inspectors thrive on urgency because frightened property owners stop asking smart questions. 10 minutes later, I had the full picture. His criminal record, active parole status, and most revealing of all, bank activity showing a $40,000 deposit 3 days earlier from Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting LLC. The stench of Kowalski's bargain bin cologne blended with diesel fumes from the news van, but beneath it lingered something I recognized from 100 interrogation rooms, the sharp, acidic smell of fierce sweat from someone who knows the trap is snapping shut. Mr. Fletcher, the reporter pressed again, do you have any comment on the environmental hazards your property supposedly presents? I stared straight into the camera and said I had complete faith that properly licensed, legitimate authorities would conduct any investigation using established protocols. I stressed the words legitimate and properly licensed, and Kowalski's eye twitched. He muttered urgently into his phone and began breaking down equipment. As their whole circus packed up, something important stood out. The hazmat crew never collected a single soil sample. They snapped photos, waved handheld meters for the cameras, but skipped every real collection step, because you can't falsify lab results when there's no contaminated soil to test. Victoria's Escalade rolled in just as the news van pulled away, the timing too perfect, like she'd been watching from somewhere close. Such a tragedy, she sighed, tiptoeing around imaginary contamination in designer heels that probably cost more than my grandfather's final disability payment. Environmental issues make land practically worthless. But don't worry, our investors are still willing to help despite the inconvenience. Mrs. Ashworth, I replied, scrolling my laptop, I'm curious about Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting. Your company paid Inspector Kowalski $40,000 3 days ago. Her smile turned glacial. I have no idea what you're talking about. Federal conviction for environmental fraud, currently on parole and freshly paid by your firm, that's quite the coincidence. Mr. Fletcher, she snapped, grief may be clouding your judgment. No grief here, just professional experience with environmental fraud investigations. I tilted the screen toward her, displaying Kowalski's record. Are you aware that hiring convicted felons to falsify government reports is a federal crime? RICO conspiracy too if there's a pattern. Her face drained white as winter snow. She climbed back into her SUV without another word, but I caught fragments of her frantic phone call through the glass. Someone was about to have a very unpleasant talk about operational security. As her taillights vanished, it hit me this wasn't small-town corruption. This was organized crime with federal reach, and they'd chosen the wrong target. Time to see how deep the hole really went. By December 26th, Victoria's operation had shifted into overdrive. I woke to a mailbox crammed with 31 separate violation notices, each more imaginative than a screenwriter mid-meltdown. Unauthorized agricultural structures, commercial activity without retail permits, failure to maintain community aesthetics, and my favorite, unlawful storage of vintage farming equipment. Apparently my grandfather's 1960 John Deere now endangered neighborhood property values. Every violation carried a fine, $500 here, $2,000 there. By the end, they demanded $23,000 in retroactive licensing fees for Christmas tree sales allegedly dating back to 2019. The smell of fresh ink mixed with my coffee, which now tasted like bottled anxiety. I spread the notices across the kitchen table like case files, realizing that's exactly what they were becoming. Then my phone rang with the overly cheerful tone that always signals disaster. Mr. Fletcher, this is Jennifer Walsh from Cascade Collection Services. We've been hired to collect your outstanding HOA obligations. Our records show you're currently $112,000 in arrears. $112,000. Yesterday it was 47 plus 85. Apparently math worked differently in Victoria's universe, where 2 plus 2 equals whatever number steals your land. I'll need documentation for these claims. Sir, documentation has already been provided. We're calling to arrange immediate payment or discuss asset seizure. We accept cash, certified funds, or can initiate repossession within 24 hours. Asset seizure the day after Christmas. These people had hearts poured from concrete and souls rented from a payday lender. What's your legal authority to seize assets? We're fully authorized by our client, and your accounts have been flagged for protective review pending resolution. They froze my accounts without a court order over a holiday weekend. That's when my federal instincts kicked in. While Jennifer droned on, I opened my laptop and followed the threats. Cascade Collection Services, Delaware registration, 3 months old, right after Grandpa died. Registered agent, Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting. Victoria's environmental scam doubled as her collections racket. Then it got better. Pine Ridge Environmental was owned by Mountain View Development LLC, which rolled up into Pristine Valley Holdings, ultimately tracing back to the Ashworth Family Trust. Victoria hadn't built a shell company, she'd built a shell empire. My phone buzzed again. Account access suspended pending verification. First Bank of Pine Ridge, Grandpa's bank since the Kennedy years, had locked me out. Then came the twist that changed everything. I checked the bank staff directory and found it, Tom Walsh, bank president. Jennifer Walsh's brother. The collector threatening me and the banker freezing me out were family. Victoria hadn't just captured the HOA, she'd infected the entire local financial system. I drove into town to confirm my theory and found Margaret Henley stringing Christmas lights in a wind sharp enough to peel paint. She taught 3rd grade here for 40 years. If anyone knew the town's secrets, it was her. Owen, she called, breath-puffing white as she waved. Heard you're tangling with Queen Victoria and her land pirates. That's one way to say it. How long has she been running this? Margaret's expression darkened. It started small, landscaping rules, architectural standards, then she realized people were too scared or too broke to fight. She leaned in. 3 families lost everything this year. Same routine every time. Violations, fines, impossible debt, friendly investors. Exactly. The Johnsons, the Kowalskis, old Pete Brennan's ranch, McMansions within 6 months. She gestured at the subdivisions. Used to be all working farms. My phone rang again. Same number. Mr. Fletcher, final notice. We're willing to settle at 60 cents on the dollar if you pay immediately. Jennifer sounded different now, strained, rushed, like someone had told her to close before it all blew up. I'll be reviewing everything with my attorney. Sir, we need a resolution today. Our authorization expires at midnight. Authorization expires. What kind of legitimate collection agency operates on a countdown clock? Then I'll need your supervisor. There was dead silence for nearly 30 seconds, followed by muffled voices in the background, including Victoria's unmistakable tone mentioning federal complications and an accelerated timeline. They knew exactly who I was and they were spiraling. When Jennifer came back on the line, the desperation was impossible to hide. Upon further review, we can resolve this for $10,000. From $112,000 to $10,000 in a single phone call. That wasn't negotiation. That was raw panic. I told her I'd consider it and ended the call. Sitting in my truck, it finally clicked where Victoria went wrong. She'd built a criminal operation designed to exploit isolated, vulnerable families, but she just tried to run it on a federal agent trained specifically to dismantle financial fraud rings like hers. Game on. December 27th ushered in psychological warfare that would have made Joseph Goebbels take notes. I woke up to find anonymous flyers shoved under every door in the neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of me that looked like it was snapped during a brutal hangover, stamped with the headline, "Federal Agent Under Investigation. Is your family safe?" The text read like a delusional manifesto. FBI agent Owen Fletcher is currently under federal investigation for abuse of authority and misuse of government resources. Sources confirm he is using Pine Ridge as a base for illegal surveillance operations targeting innocent families. Protect your children. Demand answers. Anonymous sources. Right. The same anonymous sources who probably drove a white Escalade and bowed to your majesty. My phone started vibrating before I finished my first cup of coffee, which now tasted like liquid anxiety mixed with a splash of impending disaster. Mr. Fletcher, this is Carol Bentley from Maple Street. We're organizing a Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting tonight to discuss your situation. My situation. The allegations. We simply cannot allow federal agents to conduct surveillance in a family neighborhood. Think of the children. Think of the children. The universal rallying cry of busybodies who've never produced an original thought in their lives. By noon, I'd taken 15 calls from concerned citizens, demanding everything from background checks to my permanent relocation. Victoria's Whisper campaign was spreading faster than gossip at a church potluck. The real work of art appeared when I drove to Hank's auto shop. The smell of motor oil and honest labor usually grounded me, but today the place felt wrong. No music, no friendly wave from under a hood, just a heavy silence thick enough to wrench apart. I found Hank buried in paperwork, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Owen," he said without meeting my eyes. "I can't work on your truck anymore." "Engine trouble?" "Nothing's wrong with your truck." His voice carried the strain of a man being forced to betray his principles. "It's business. All my commercial accounts got calls yesterday. Liability concerns, they said, about working with someone under federal investigation." The pressure campaign had escalated. They weren't just isolating me anymore. They were punishing anyone who helped. "Hank, you know that flyer is garbage." "Of course I know." He finally looked up, anger and frustration battling in his weathered face. "But I've got 3 kids, a mortgage, and half my income comes from those McMansion clients." They were very clear. Support you, lose their business. Walking back to my truck, something triggered my prosecutor instincts. The flyer paper had a distinctive texture, high-quality stock typically reserved for political campaigns. Even more interesting was a tiny printer's mark in the corner. CCS 2025. CCS. Cascade Campaign Services. The same cascade tied to the collection agency. Victoria wasn't just running parallel scams. She was using the same infrastructure for all of them. I spent the afternoon in my grandfather's study, cross-referencing business filings on my laptop while sunlight streamed through windows that hadn't seen investigative work since he compared seed catalogs. What I uncovered was political corruption so deep it made organized crime look amateur. Cascade Campaign Services had printed materials for every local election over the last 4 years. County commissioners who fast-tracked her permits. School board members who rubber-stamped rezoning requests. Ballot initiatives that inflated HOA authority beyond all logic. She hadn't just captured the local economy. She'd been buying democracy one election at a time. Here's what they don't teach you in civics class. Using campaign resources to print anonymous attack materials is federal election fraud. Coordinating that with collection agencies and development schemes turns it into a full-blown RICO conspiracy wrapped in a federal bow. My phone rang around 5 p.m. unknown number, that distinctive tone that screams reporter hunting blood. Agent Fletcher, Rebecca Martinez, Channel 12 Investigative Unit. We're following up on reports of unauthorized federal activity in Pine Ridge. Care to comment? The rumor had evolved from surveillance to rogue agent fantasy. Victoria's telephone game was outperforming a viral TikTok. "Ms. Martinez, I'm here settling my grandfather's estate. Probate paperwork and family memories. Nothing more thrilling. But you are an active federal agent conducting operations. Classic trap. Say yes and confirm the lie. Say no and risk misleading the press. I'd love to talk about my grandfather's 60-year history selling Christmas trees. Want to interview families who've been coming here since Eisenhower was president?" Silence. Clearly not the angle she rehearsed. "We're more interested in the investigation reports. There is no investigation into me being here, But there may soon be one into whoever is impersonating federal authority and spreading false claims. That's a felony, by the way. Carries up to 20 years if you're looking for story depth. She hung up faster than a scammer caught by caller ID. As darkness settled over the kitchen where Grandpa planned 6 decades of Christmases, I took stock of the modern tools of character assassination. Anonymous flyers, economic coercion, compromised media, bought politicians. Victoria had built something more dangerous than simple fraud. She'd weaponized the community itself, turning neighbors against neighbors, fear against truth, convenience against integrity. But she'd made one fatal error. Federal agents don't retreat from intimidation. We document it, dissect it, and use it to build cases that end careers and dismantle criminal empires. The Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting was set for 7 p.m. time to observe Victoria's psychological operation firsthand and begin collecting evidence for the prosecution that would end her suburban reign of terror. My grandfather always said the strongest Christmas trees grow in the darkest soil. That night, I was about to learn just how poisoned Victoria's soil really was. The Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting was manufactured outrage served with stale coffee and cookies that tasted like cardboard. 43 concerned citizens packed into a community center that smelled of disinfectant and broken democracy. Victoria sat front and center, performing concerned neighbor with polished righteousness. Her vanilla perfume was losing its fight against nervous sweat, always a promising sign when suspects feel cornered. Agent Fletcher refuses to explain his surveillance activities, she began. Declared with full soap opera intensity, our community deserves transparency. While Victoria staged her dramatic federal conspiracy performance, I quietly recorded every word, collecting future witness statements for the criminal case this was clearly becoming. But the real breakthrough had happened earlier that afternoon, inside Grandpa's old safe. Tucked behind yellowed insurance papers, I found the original 1962 Federal Agricultural Preservation Agreement. Most landowners never realize that small family farms can qualify for federal protection. During the Kennedy administration, my grandfather had enrolled the property in a program designed to protect working agricultural land through tax incentives and powerful regulatory shields. The wording was brutally unmistakable. The property retained perpetual agricultural use classification, overriding all local zoning rules, homeowner association authority, and municipal development requirements. Every fine, violation, and seizure attempt had been federally illegal from the very beginning. Then came the emotional gut punch, a handwritten letter clipped to the file, dated 3 months before Grandpa died. Owen, if you're reading this, the vultures are circling. That Ashworth woman wants the farm for her resort project. She doesn't know about the federal protections. Use your training. Don't let them steal what we built. Evidence enclosed. Harold. He'd known. While battling cancer that drained his savings, my grandfather had been quietly collecting proof of Victoria's conspiracy. Inside the envelope were wire transfers to county officials, recorded conversations about eliminating property obstacles, and architectural plans for Pine Ridge Mountain Resort with our farm labeled as acquired through municipal cooperation. Agent Fletcher, Victoria announced theatrically, our neighbors deserve to know why the federal government is targeting our peaceful community. The room went silent. 43 uneasy sets of eyes turned toward me. I rose slowly, holding the preservation agreement like a legal grenade. Mrs. Ashworth, they deserve to know why you've been running organized fraud schemes using fabricated violations and shell companies. Her smile fractured like ice under heat. I have no idea what you're talking about. Pine Ridge Environmental Cascade Collection, Mountain View Development, everyone owned by your family trust, everyone engaged in systematic fraud. Then I unfolded the document. Most importantly, this farm has been under federal agricultural protection since 1962. Every violation notice issued here constitutes a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years. Victoria's face drained of color. That's impossible. Federal protection supersedes all local authority, I said calmly. And here's what every rural landowner should know. Agricultural protections exist at multiple levels, but most people never research historical designations. A single record search can uncover safeguards that override local political games. Never assume local officials have unlimited power over agricultural land. I opened Grandpa's evidence folder. Care to explain these wire transfers to county officials? Or these recorded conversations planning property seizures? The room erupted. Neighbors who moments earlier looked ready to tear me apart were suddenly riveted by Victoria's business dealings. They're fabricated, she stammered as her authority evaporated. Federal entrapment, ma'am. And falsely accusing federal agents is another felony. I suggest you call an attorney. She snatched her purse and rushed for the door, but I had one final gift. How many families have you destroyed? Mail fraud carries 20 years per victim. I'm counting 8 so far. She froze like a deer caught in legal headlights. Federal grand juries love organized crime that targets elderly families. Voluntary cooperation may be your only chance to avoid life in prison. She bolted, her panicked phone call echoing down the hallway. Emergency meeting. We have massive federal problems. As neighbors shared their stories, the scale became undeniable. Victoria had systematically ruined families across the valley, stealing millions through manufactured violations. Now I had federal jurisdiction, documentary proof, and authority that made her local connections meaningless. The hunter had become the hunted. That night, Victoria's emergency meeting lit up the Pine Ridge Development office like a Christmas tree. Ironic, given her plan to destroy the valley's most famous Christmas tree farm. I watched from my truck as luxury cars arrived like vultures circling roadkill. County Commissioner Walsh, Bank President Tom Walsh, 3 expensive suits I didn't recognize, and Victoria pacing behind floor-to-ceiling glass, gesturing wildly like a conductor leading an orchestra of panic. Time to organize my own meeting. The next morning I made encrypted calls to the FBI Financial Crimes Division in Seattle. Agent Sarah Sterling, my former partner, nearly choked on her coffee when I explained everything. You walked into a RICO conspiracy while settling your grandfather's estate. They targeted federally protected land and never expected the owner to fight back with federal muscle. How many victims? At least 8 families. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations. Conservative estimate, $12 million in damages. Sarah let out a low whistle. This could be our biggest rural fraud case. Want task force support. I want federal arrest warrants ready for simultaneous execution. These people have deep local roots. Move on one, the rest vanish. Give me 48 hours. And Owen, don't do anything reckless. Too late for that, but I appreciated the concern. While waiting for the federal cavalry, I prepared the community. Victoria's scheme thrived on isolation, targeting vulnerable families, cutting support, manufacturing legal panic to prevent resistance. Time to reverse it. I called Margaret Henley first. How would you feel about hosting Christmas Eve service at the Fletcher farm? Owen, that would be wonderful. Harold always dreamed of holding Christmas service in the old barn. This community needs to remember what Christmas really means. She called the pastor immediately. Next was Hank's auto shop. Despite the pressure he'd been under, Hank answered right away. I can't work on your truck. I don't need repairs. I need contractors willing to donate time to make an old barn safe for Christmas service. Silence. Then, how many do you need? By noon, 12 contractors had committed, along with the Historical Society, local businesses donating supplies, and 3 church choirs. Word spread through the old Pine Ridge network. Families who remembered when community mattered more than property values. The final move was calling Channel 12 News. Ms. Martinez, Owen Fletcher. Still interested in federal operations in Pine Ridge? Agent Fletcher, absolutely. How about this angle? Federal agent honors grandfather's legacy with a community Christmas service on a historically protected farm targeted by development fraud. Development fraud? I'm about to hand you the biggest local corruption story of the year. Federal charges, county officials, organized theft targeting elderly families. We'll be there tomorrow morning. Federal cases leave trails. Wire transfers, forged documents, shell companies, all screaming their guilt. And while she was busy scrambling, the truth was finally coming into the light. Victoria's criminal empire was already cracking, and she was quietly building her own prosecution file. That afternoon, I walked through the barn where Grandpa had stored 6 decades of Christmas memories. The scent of old hay blended with pine resin from generations of Christmas trees, and the rough wooden beams bore the scars of Montana winters dating back to Eisenhower. This barn had hosted school events, weddings, town meetings, everything that turned Pine Ridge into a real community instead of a collection of zip codes. What rural landowners should understand is that agricultural buildings often qualify for historical preservation status, adding layers of federal protection beyond standard farm zoning. That status can block demolition even under aggressive development pressure. It's worth checking because old barns and farmhouses often carry safeguards developers hope you never uncover. My phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. Federal warrants approved. Task force arrives tomorrow evening. Press conference December 24th, 3 p.m. Try not to get arrested before we get there. December 24th. Christmas Eve. The same date Victoria first tried to steal Grandpa's tractor. The timing felt poetic. But Victoria was preparing her own last move. Near sunset, I noticed strange activity, cars stopping to photograph the land, surveying tools set up along the road. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Fletcher, this is Bradley Kowalski with Pine Ridge Environmental. We need to discuss urgent safety issues related to your Christmas service. The same fake inspector from the contamination scam. Instead of retreating, Victoria was doubling down. Mr. Kowalski, you're currently on federal parole for environmental fraud. Regardless of prior matters, I have authority to assess environmental hazards. Your event presents serious public safety concerns. What concerns exactly? Structural collapse, soil contamination exposure, fire hazards from outdated electrical systems. I'm prepared to issue emergency closure orders immediately. Emergency closure during Christmas week based on fabricated claims from a convicted felon. I'll need your current licensing and written authority. In emergencies, documentation can follow implementation. That's not how emergency authority works. After I hung up, her plan became clear. She couldn't stop the federal case, but she could stop the Christmas service, prevent media attention, isolate the community, and reduce public sympathy. But she made one fatal mistake, choosing my grandfather's farm as her battlefield. I'd spent 15 years learning how federal law enforcement dismantles organized crime. It was time to return the lesson. December 23rd began with the smell of diesel fuel where it absolutely didn't belong. I woke to find the barn's exterior soaked with enough fuel to grill half of Montana. The sharp chemical odor mixed with pine needles and frost screamed staged arson. My security cameras captured everything. At 3 a.m., Victoria's nephew, Derek Ashworth, arrived with 5-gallon cans and spent 40 minutes drenching the wooden walls like he was seasoning meat. If she couldn't steal the land, she'd burn the evidence and blame faulty wiring during Christmas service. Criminal geniuses rarely live up to the title. As I documented the fuel residue, my phone rang again, this time with a voice meant to sound official. Mr. Fletcher, Chief Inspector Williams, State Fire Marshal's Office. We've received reports of extreme fire hazards tied to tonight's Christmas service. Immediate inspection required. An inspection on Christmas Eve morning based on reports from someone clearly unconcerned with safety. What hazards were reported? Anonymous tips cited electrical violations, structural issues, and accelerants improperly stored near the venue. Accelerants? They weren't even pretending anymore. I'll need credentials and inspection authority. In emergencies, credentials can be verified during inspection. Another fake inspector. Victoria's contacts were apparently full of felons impersonating officials. That's where she crossed the line. She escalated to environmental terrorism on federally protected land while a federal task force was already en route. While Chief Williams threatened closure, I ran his voice through a federal database. Bradley Kowalski again using a new alias. Impersonating a federal official carries a mandatory 5-year sentence. Environmental terrorism adds 20 more. Derek's arson attempt qualified as domestic terrorism. What began as financial fraud had exploded into federal terrorism charges. Chief Williams, I said evenly, I believe you're actually Bradley Kowalski, a convicted environmental fraud offender violating parole by impersonating authorities. Silence. Then the line went dead. Within an hour, 3 real fire engines arrived, followed by legitimate state marshals, environmental inspectors, and enough officials to staff a small agency. When environmental terrorism is reported on federally protected property, every acronym shows up. The real Chief Williams, a no-nonsense veteran, examined the diesel-soaked walls and immediately contacted FBI hazmat. Mr. Fletcher, this was deliberate sabotage intended to justify closure orders. Whoever did this wanted your building to burn with people inside. Victoria wasn't just stealing land, she was willing to risk mass murder to cover it up. By noon, Pine Ridge looked like a federal crime scene because it was. FBI vehicles, environmental response units, federal marshals, agents everywhere. Agent Sarah Sterling arrived looking like Christmas had come early for prosecutors. Owen, when you said RICO conspiracy, you didn't mention environmental terrorism and attempted mass murder. I like saving the surprises. We now have evidence to charge the entire network under federal terrorism statutes. Wire fraud was just the warm-up. But Victoria wasn't done. Around 2 p.m., while agents collected evidence, she launched one final desperate move. A convoy arrived, county deputies, code enforcement, health inspectors, emergency management. Every local official she'd bribed making a last coordinated attempt to shut down the service. Deputy Martinez, whose campaign Victoria had bankrolled, stepped forward with a clipboard. Mr. Fletcher, we're executing emergency closure orders for multiple violations. This event cannot proceed. A shutdown from every agency at once. She was throwing local corruption at a federal investigation. Agent Sterling stepped forward, badge gleaming like a weapon. Deputy Martinez, this property is under federal protection and subject to federal jurisdiction. Explain your authority to override federal agricultural protections. We have emergency powers. Issued by whom? Commissioner Walsh, currently under federal investigation for bribery? Bank President Tom Walsh facing fraud conspiracy charges? The deputy's confidence cracked instantly. 2 options, Sarah said calmly. Withdraw these illegal orders and cooperate, or join the defendants facing federal conspiracy charges. One by one, the county officials retreated to their vehicles like vampires fleeing the sunrise. Sunlight has a way of ending emergencies. Emergency powers evaporate when faced with federal authority backed by documented evidence of corruption. As the last county vehicle rolled away, Margaret Henley arrived with the first wave of Christmas service attendees. "Oh my dear, is everything ready for tonight?" she asked. I glanced at the federal crime scene tape, the hazmat crews, and enough agents to staff a regional office. "Margaret, this is going to be the most well-protected Christmas service in Montana history." The heavy diesel smell was finally fading, replaced by something sweeter, the scent of justice about to be served alongside Christmas cookies and federal arrest warrants. Victoria's reign of suburban terror was coming to an end, and it would be spectacular. By 4 p.m. on December 23rd, with federal agents swarming Pine Ridge like ants on a dropped sandwich, Victoria played her most desperate card. My phone rang with a number from FBI Internal Affairs. "Agent Fletcher, Inspector General Patricia Morrison. We've received a formal complaint alleging you're abusing federal authority for personal vendettas and using government resources to harass private citizens." The complaint, filed 2 hours earlier by concerned citizen Victoria Ashworth, claimed I was conducting unauthorized surveillance and intimidating law-abiding developers with fabricated charges. While federal agents were collecting evidence of her terrorism attempts, Victoria was trying to get me investigated by my own agency. The audacity was almost impressive. "Inspector Morrison," I said calmly, "are you aware this property is currently an active federal crime scene involving environmental terrorism?" "That's exactly why this complaint is concerning," she replied. "Using a state settlement as cover for unauthorized operations raises ethical questions." A twist, but one Victoria hadn't anticipated. Every action I'd taken was pre-authorized through FBI financial crimes as part of Operation Pine Ridge, a multi-state investigation into rural property fraud. Sarah Sterling had been tracking similar schemes across 3 states, and my grandfather's farm had become the perfect trap. "Inspector Morrison, Agent Sterling from Financial Crimes should have briefed your office about Operation Pine Ridge yesterday." Keyboard clicks followed. "According to our records, you've been operating under full federal authority since December 22nd. This complaint appears to be witness intimidation by subjects currently under investigation." Victoria's internal affairs gambit had detonated in her hands. Filing false complaints against federal agents is obstruction of justice, with mandatory prison time. Around 5 p.m. as contractors finished prepping the barn, a national news van pulled in. Rebecca Martinez from Channel 12 had already sold the story to larger networks. "Agent Fletcher, David Sterling, National Crime Network. We're investigating reports of federal overreach targeting rural developers. Care to comment on allegations you've manufactured terrorism charges to protect personal property?" Victoria was framing this as government harassment of small business owners, perfect fodder for political outrage. "Mr. Sterling, I'd be happy to discuss the federal prosecution of organized crime targeting elderly rural families," I said. "Interested in interviewing victims who lost homes to systematic fraud? We're focused on federal authority abuse. Then you'll want the terrorism charges filed today against suspects who attempted arson at a community Christmas service." His expression shifted from skeptical to professionally intrigued. Terrorism sells better than zoning disputes. As Sterling set up cameras, my phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. "Drop charges or your family pays. Federal agents can have accidents. Christmas service might have unexpected fireworks. Direct threats against federal agents. Each one a separate federal crime with mandatory sentencing. Law enforcement learns this quickly. Criminals escalate when cornered and make the worst mistakes when desperate." Victoria's network was doing both. Agent Sarah Sterling arrived as sunset painted the snow-covered farm in gold and crimson, the kind of scene that would make Norman Rockwell weep. She reviewed the threatening texts and smiled like a prosecutor opening Christmas gifts. Oh, and they're threatening federal agents now. Automatic terrorism enhancement under the Patriot Act. She started counting on her fingers. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations, environmental terrorism, impersonating officials, witness intimidation, obstruction, threats against agents. Conservative estimate, 200 years per conspirator before plea deals. The national news crew was interviewing Margaret about the farm's history when Victoria arrived for her final confrontation. She stepped out of her Escalade like she was entering a boardroom, not a federal crime scene. Agent Fletcher, we can resolve this misunderstanding like civilized adults. Misunderstanding? I replied. After arson attempts, fake inspectors, death threats, and false federal complaints? This has gone far enough. I'll offer compensation for perceived damages. You can't bribe your way out of federal terrorism charges. National cameras captured every word, broadcasting her damage control attempt to millions. You're making a mistake, she warned. I have connections you can't imagine. Your connections include a bribed commissioner, a fraudulent bank president, and paroled environmental inspectors, I said. Unless you know the FBI director personally, you're overestimating your reach. She turned to leave, but Sarah stepped forward with the timing of someone who'd waited her entire career for this moment. Victoria Ashworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism, wire fraud, money laundering, and 15 additional federal charges. You have the right to remain silent, but honestly, silence won't help much now. As the handcuffs clicked shut, fear finally cracked through the entitlement and fake authority. This isn't over, she hissed. For you, I replied, everything is over. Christmas service starts in 2 hours, and this community is about to remember what justice looks like. National cameras captured it all. The arrest, the evidence, the community gathering despite terrorism attempts. By morning, Victoria's mugshot would symbolize federal justice protecting rural families on every major network. The scent of pine needles mixed with diesel exhaust from federal vehicles. But beneath it all lingered something sweeter. Justice served with Christmas cookies and arrest warrants. Sometimes the good guys really do win. Christmas Eve, 7 p.m., the Fletcher farm barn glowed against the Montana winter darkness, wrapped in lights that had survived arson attempts, federal investigations, and enough criminal conspiracies to fill a Netflix series. Over 600 people gathered despite threats, creating the most well-documented Christmas service in state history. National news trucks lined the driveway like mechanical vultures. Satellite dishes aimed skyward as reporters delivered breathless updates about federal agents and Christmas miracles. Hot chocolate, diesel, and pine needles blended into a chaotic cocktail that smelled like America louder than 4th of July fireworks. Pastor Williams stepped to the FBI wired microphone. Friends, we gather tonight to celebrate Christmas, community, and truth's victory over deception. Applause rolled across the valley like thunder. But Victoria's network had one final desperate move. 3 black SUVs roared up the driveway, a last-ditch intimidation play meant to rattle civilians and challenge federal authority. Sheriff Martinez emerged with deputies and emergency officials. Enough badges to stock a law enforcement convention. Ladies and gentlemen, Martinez announced through a bullhorn that made his voice sound godlike and furious, this gathering is ordered to disperse immediately. We have emergency authority to clear this property due to ongoing safety violations and terrorist activity. The crowd shifted uneasily. Even with federal protection, local law enforcement still carried psychological weight after months of intimidation. This property has been deemed unsafe for public assembly, Martinez continued, and anyone remaining faces arrest for unlawful. That was when Agent Sarah Sterling stepped forward, carrying herself with the calm certainty of someone holding all the winning cards while everyone else was playing a losing hand. Sheriff Martinez, her voice projected effortlessly across the barn, explain under what authority you believe you can override federal protection on this property. Martinez lifted his bullhorn, but his confidence faltered. Federal agents don't control local safety emergencies. Sarah didn't miss a beat. Actually, we do, especially when those so-called emergencies are deliberately manufactured by criminal conspirators already under federal investigation. She raised an official document that reflected the barn lights like a drawn blade. A federal court order establishing exclusive federal jurisdiction over this land. National news cameras snapped back and forth between Sarah and Martinez like a high-stakes tennis match played with law books and warrants. And furthermore, Sarah continued, her momentum building like a runaway freight train, any attempt to disrupt this federally protected gathering constitutes obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Martinez's deputies glanced at one another, their expressions clearly saying no one mentioned federal charges during the briefing. Then came the real turning point. I stepped forward holding my grandfather's preservation agreement and a folder so thick it looked dangerous by itself. Sheriff Martinez, before you continue this performance, you should be aware that every member of Victoria Ashworth's criminal network was arrested 2 hours ago by federal agents executing coordinated warrants across 3 states. The crowd's low murmur erupted into excited chatter, more entertaining than any Christmas program they'd ever attended. County Commissioner Walsh in federal custody for bribery. Bank President Tom Walsh, arrested for wire fraud conspiracy. Environmental Inspector Kowalski, headed to federal prison for impersonating officials. I flipped through arrest documents like a holiday wish list. And Victoria Ashworth herself, currently enjoying federal hospitality on terrorism charges, organized fraud, and over 20 additional felonies. Martinez's face drained of color. That's impossible. I spoke with Commissioner Walsh earlier today. You spoke with federal agents using Walsh's phone. He's been cooperating since this afternoon. Sarah smiled with the satisfaction of someone who knew the game was already over. You can either join him in custody or withdraw these unlawful orders and allow this community to celebrate Christmas in peace. The barn went silent except for the hum of news cameras and the distant sound of deputies quietly retreating to their vehicles. Sheriff Martinez, Pastor Williams said kindly, "You're welcome to stay for the service. We've got plenty of hot chocolate." Martinez lowered his bullhorn, scanned the 600 faces staring back at him, and made the only smart decision left. "We're withdrawing the emergency orders pending further review." The crowd exploded into applause, loud enough it probably registered on seismographs in the next county. Cameras captured everything. A federal showdown, criminal arrests, and a community standing victorious against organized corruption. Pastor Williams raised his voice once more. "Let us now celebrate Christ's birth and justice reborn in Pine Ridge Valley." As carols filled the barn, I felt my grandfather's presence in the pine-scented air, the warmth of the crowd, and the deep satisfaction of seeing bullies finally face consequences. Margaret's Christmas cookies tasted even sweeter mixed with justice, best served ice cold alongside federal prison sentences. Outside, reporters broadcast the story nationwide, turning Victoria Ashworth into the latest example of federal law protecting rural families. Inside, 600 people celebrated Christmas and the defeat of suburban tyranny with hot chocolate and a sense of unity no amount of money could buy. The sound of carols blending with the distant rumble of federal vehicles carrying criminals away formed a symphony my grandfather would have been proud to hear. Sometimes David really does defeat Goliath, especially when David carries a federal badge and Goliath commits terrorism on federally protected land. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Valley looked transformed. The McMansions still stood, but they felt smaller now, stripped of their intimidation like exposed bullies without teeth. The biggest change was the people. Neighbors talked again. HOA threats and property value paranoia no longer ruled conversations. Victoria Ashworth pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges and received 18 years in federal prison. Her nephew Derek got 15 for environmental terrorism. The rest of the network followed, marking the largest rural corruption prosecution in Montana's history. Real justice came through restitution. Federal asset forfeiture recovered over $40 million from Victoria's shell companies and returned it to the families she'd victimized. The Johnsons reclaimed their ranch. The Kowalskis rebuilt their farm. Old Pete Brennan's grandchildren now had college funds. The Fletcher Farm Christmas tree business flourished beyond anything my grandfather imagined. What began as a single Christmas service became an annual tradition drawing families from across the region. We sold over 2,000 trees this season, with waiting lists already forming for next year. But the barn became more than a tree operation. The Fletcher Agricultural Protection Center was born, offering free legal help to rural families facing HOA harassment, development pressure, and fraudulent enforcement. Margaret Henley ran operations with the efficiency of someone who'd handled third graders for decades. Hank oversaw the workshop restoring farm equipment for families who couldn't afford replacements. The center had already helped 12 families across Montana and Wyoming. Victoria's scheme wasn't unique. Rural property fraud was spreading nationwide, targeting elderly landowners with manufactured violations and crushing debt. Our success drew attention in Washington. Senator Richardson introduced the Rural Property Protection Act to strengthen federal agricultural safeguards and provide resources for families fighting development fraud. The bill was expected to pass next session, potentially saving thousands of family farms. The impact went beyond law. The annual Fletcher Farm Festival became the Valley's largest economic driver. Margaret's Cookies sold online to 48 states. Hank's shop expanded and hired more help. Even the California transplants embraced the community, volunteering their marketing skills to help expose similar fraud elsewhere. The moment I knew we'd truly won came at last week's town meeting. The agenda was ordinary: roads, schools, winter prep. No emergencies. No manufactured crises. No power grabs disguised as protection. Just neighbors solving real problems together. Afterward, I walked through the barn where my grandfather's portrait hung beside the Federal Agricultural Preservation Certificate. Hay and pine filled the air as moonlight streamed through windows that had witnessed 60 Montana winters. I could almost hear Harold's voice in the wind. "You did good, son." My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Sterling. New case in Wyoming. Developer stealing ranch land through water rights fraud. Same pattern. Interested in consulting? I looked around the barn where everything had begun 6 months earlier. The community was healed. The criminals were imprisoned. Justice had been served. But there were other families facing the same nightmare. I texted back, "When do we start?" Sometimes the best Christmas gift is the chance to keep giving. Fletcher Farm would keep selling trees, but it would also stand as proof that communities can defeat corruption, that federal law protects those willing to use it, and that sometimes the good guys really do win when they choose to fight for what's right.